Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This morning I'm going to give a retreat postscript, and the title of my talk is Self-Love. Retreats, especially online retreats, are really a way for us to take our practice into a depth container. It's kind of like everything that we sit with our life, everything that's going on, gets to go into this contained space where we get to examine it, be with it, talk about it with others, and bring self-care and kindness and curiosity to our experience. And on this last retreat, I started thinking about a sutta that I had studied for many, many years. And suttas are like that. Suttas are some of the Buddhist discourses that are written in more archaic language, so you don't really know what they mean. So it takes a very long time to think about them, kind of unpack them. And this was a sutta, it's called the Kalahavivada Sutta. You don't have to write that down or worry about it. Arguments and disputes. It's a sutta on arguments and disputes. And I was taught it earlier, and it emphasizes that the root cause of arguments and disputes lies in attachments to things considered dear to oneself. So holding oneself dear, holding others dear, this is how sorrow is born, and along with arguments and disputes. So this has worked on me over the years, and I've had many conclusions and thoughts and contemplations about it. One of the directions that you can't help but come away with is, well, then I won't hold others dear, which is tragic. You don't want to do that. But this kind of, don't form attachments, stay away from getting too involved with people we love or overly attached. There's all these kind of things that go through your mind or my mind over the years that I've contemplated the sutta. One other direction was, by knowing that those who I hold dear are going to pass away and disappear from my life, always treat them as precious. Well, that sets up a lot of guilt and shame when you don't treat somebody as precious and something happens where you're actually angry or you've made a mistake. So I'm trying to get at the complexity of such a statement as if you hold somebody dear, there's going to be sorrow from it. So one of the directions I came to was that maybe that's not always true. I really have to question that. Is that always true that if I hold somebody dear, there's sorrow? And I found that it wasn't, because often there was joy and happiness from holding people dear. There was also a direction of loving others as a spiritual path, became even something more sacred, had more deep meaning to me, gave my life more deep meaning. So it didn't seem to fit with the sutta, and I kind of dropped the sutta for a while, and went away from it. But it came back up on this past retreat, and it came from another angle. I went to another source, and this is from a book called After Buddhism, and it was written by Stephen Batchelor, and he is a secular Buddhist, and he also really, in this book of After Buddhism, he fills out the characters that would have been in the Buddha's life in the time of their actual lived experience. So it's somewhat fictional, and it's also based on a lot of suttas and research that he's done. And in it, he talks about the Buddha as a human being that had a life and friends and was involved in politics and was involved in the world, his inner world and his outer world. And his name was Gautama, so he often refers to the Buddha as Gautama. And this is a conversation that is brought to him from a king that he had a friendship with. So the king's name was King Pasenadi, and his wife was Malika. And I like this story because Malika is the protagonist in it. And we're just coming off International Women's Day retreat. And it's very rare to quote a lot of women in the Buddhist suttas. So I really like that her name and her understandings got brought to light. But she asks her husband, the king, is there anyone more dear to you than yourself? And the king said, no, there isn't. And he asks her the same, is there anyone more dear to you than yourself? And she says, no, there isn't. And I think there's a teaching here. But she couldn't verbalize it. She couldn't articulate it. So she took the conversation, they took the conversation, probably the king took the conversation to Gautama, who gives this unexpected conclusion. If that's so, anyone who loves himself, who is more dear to himself, I'm going to say there's no one dearer to themselves as themselves, then one should not harm others. So I've been thinking about that this morning, and it's contrasted in Stephen's book as at the time the main teachings of the land were the Upanishads, and they also had conversations about what is dear and who is dear, and they say that the self is dearer than a son, it's dearer than wealth, it's dearer than anything. And it's the innermost place within our being. But it's dear because it's divine and it will never perish. So he who considers himself dear will not perish. Now, this is really not what the Buddha was saying. So again, he does this kind of contextual thing of the teaching of the day, and he brings it in and considers it and gives it another context, gives it another conclusion. So rather than dismissing the self as an illusion, not existent at all, or something that's going to last forever and hold it dear because it's divine, he really goes into hold yourself dear because it's a foundation for an ethical practice. An ethical practice of non-harming. So I want to take that with me while I read the news as I'm coming back out of the retreat and starting to read the news again and starting to come back into the world. I can still remember the first time I went on retreat and my family would ask me, oh, how was the spa? How was the hot tubs? Oh, was the massage good? And that's really not what happens on our retreats. They're very different, and they're online. So you could actually go into a hot tub if you were at a location that had one. But really taking this idea of holding yourself dear, having self-love, is a basis for an ethical practice, an ethical way to be in the world. It sounds very simple. At times it can even sound counterintuitive, and it's not so easy to do. So thank you all for being here this morning.